Hey all, Hawk and Carlton with Carlton Carnivores here, and today I've got a very special plant to share with you guys. This is a species that not a lot of people grow yet because it's got a reputation of being a rather tricky, finicky plant to grow. This is Roridula gorgonius, the bug plant, or Vlibus, as it's known in its native area. The genus Roridula is a rather interesting one. They grow kind of almost like woody bushes rather than the usual herbaceous plants that we're used to in most carnivores. These guys are native to a very small area of South Africa near the Cape. This species in particular is found from kind of the west, just east side of Cape Town to Swellerman. And its relative, Roridula dentata, grows in slightly higher, drier environments in the surrounding mountains. Roridula, unlike other carnivorous plants, these guys are kind of debated whether or not they're truly carnivorous because different people have different ideas on what it actually takes to consider something carnivorous. These guys, they do attract and capture insects like other carnivorous plants, but they are unable to actually digest them themselves because unlike other carnivorous plants, they act as a flypaper trap, so the leaves are sticky, but the glands that these guys have, they don't produce like a protein-based, water-based mucilage like the sundews or the butterworts do. Rather, what these guys have on them, and I'll show you in this short clip here, is a very powerfully sticky resin that captures insects. Resin doesn't allow for the diffusion of enzymes or really water through it, so the plant can't secrete its own enzymes to digest what it captures. Rather, in its natural environment, this species and its relative both have a symbiotic, a mutualistic relationship with a species of assassin bug. These guys are the exclusive habitat, basically, of the genus Pamaridia. And each species, Gorgonius and Dentata, have their own species of assassin bug that is found on them and basically nowhere else. Dentata has Pamaridia marlothii, and Gorgonius has Pamaridia roridulae. These guys are able to actually live on the plants. They walk around on the glands without getting captured. How they do this is not entirely known. It could be they have some sort of oily secretion that keeps them from getting stuck, or it may be that they have like hairs that break away and let them crawl across the glands without getting stuck to them. So when these guys capture insects, and sometimes even larger animals, there have been reports of big bushes of Roridula actually capturing such things as birds in their natural habitat. The assassin bugs will swarm to that captured insect, and like most assassin bugs do, they will spear it with their mouth parts, suck out the juices, the insides of the animal, and then they will release a liquid waste, feces, onto the leaves of the plant. And that liquid waste, the plant is then able to actually absorb through openings, the stomata in the leaves, and then it uses that as its source of nutrients. So where these guys are found in the wild, I was lucky enough to be able to ask somebody who's been there, so I will show you photos of the habitat. Now, first off, I'd like to give a big thanks to Alex Dietrick. He's someone who's able to actually go over and visit these plants in the wild, and he has been kind enough to let me use some of these photos for this video. This first photo is a plant that is growing in the wild. It's actually surrounded by, I believe these are Drosera slackii. So this is growing in a relatively wet seepage area, kind of sandy, acidic soils. They don't like very many nutrients like most other carnivorous plants, and they grow in very open environments. This habitat is known as fynbos, which is a fire-regulated habitat that doesn't have a lot of trees or large shrubs, so a lot of other plants are able to colonize that tend to grow low to the ground. In some areas this dries out and plants may go dormant during summer.
Again, Roridula gorgonius tends to live in areas that are a little bit wetter than its relative, and these areas tend to stay wet all year round. This species also grows fairly close to the coastline as well, so you can actually see the ocean from some of the habitats that this guy grows in. So Alex was also kind enough to send a couple of photos of Pamaridia roridulae in habitat as well, living on these plants. So as you can see, they just kind of wander around on the plants. They aren't hindered by the resinous glands that these plants have in any way, and they will find whatever insects are stuck to the plants and gather around them and suck out their food, and then in turn produce waste that the plant is able to absorb through its leaves.
So yeah, amazing habitat where these guys live, and really kind of different from where a lot of other carnivorous plants live, although as you saw, this species especially does grow alongside some other carnivorous plants in South Africa, sundews and such, so it is able to tolerate a little bit more moisture than its relative, which also makes it a little easier growing. So these guys can grow at full size, particularly this species can grow somewhere upwards 1.5 to almost 2 meters tall in some cases. In a lot of cases, though, you can actually keep them somewhat smaller. As you can see here, just by I have it in a kind of 5-inch pot, and it's flowering, so these guys can be kept in smaller containers for a period of time. So this species, particularly in cultivation, may average anywhere from 6 inches to maybe 2 feet tall, so 60 centimeters. And it produces usually singular stems that have leaves that will branch off in kind of a spidery rosette from there. And so these leaves, along the edges, they have those glands that produce the resin. And then during usually the winter season right now, you can see on here these buds that these plants develop. So just like all carnivorous plants, they are flowering plants. And so when these guys flower, they usually produce anywhere from 1 to maybe 3 or 4 buds per little stalk they produce, and they'll produce stalks for inflorescences for a couple of months out of the year. Each of those buds is surrounded by more of the sticky leaves that are modified bracts around the actual flower. And then the flower itself is a fairly large, brilliantly pink bloom with kind of slightly ruffled edges, and then inside it has a single very thick white stigma, and then the anthers that surround that. The anthers I have found kind of touchy with releasing pollen, although I have finally figured out how to do it. The anthers are structured, they look almost like little mushroom shapes, and the broad head is actually where it kind of attaches to the rest of the filament, and then the base, the little stalk that hangs off of that, is actually where the pollen sits and is released from. So teasing that little stalk will release the pollen, and then these guys should be able to be self-pollinated. We'll find out if that is accurate in a month or two here, because there are some pods that are swelling on this plant. So hopefully it is developing seeds. You can take the pollen, transfer it onto the stigma, and then wait for the best. The flowers usually open for a couple of days before closing back up, and then they will shrivel off and the actual petals will fall off, leaving just the sticky bracts that will protect the developing seed pod then. So once it's developed, the pod will break open and it will produce a number of very small kind of ovular cylindrical looking seeds. They look almost like mini brown Tic Tacs. And those, at least for this species, can generally just be sown on proper soil, given good light and fairly warm conditions, and wait. It's a waiting game. Sometimes these guys can take a long time to germinate. Other times they will sprout in a matter of weeks. So if you want to grow Roridula, of course, gorgonius is probably the species that you would want to start with. Again, they are a lot more tolerant of variable conditions than their relative dentata is. Most of these species actually don't like a lot of humidity. The area where they come from can be very dry, at least in the air at times, although they certainly will tolerate it. This guy lives in the greenhouse alongside a number of other carnivorous plants that I have, so it's able to tolerate humidity pretty well. But This is species that you want to keep in a fairly well-draining soil, and again, though it can tolerate a lot of moisture at times, it's probably best to keep it slightly on the dry side. So the soil that I keep it in is a mix of peat moss, perlite, and then I use blasting abrasive as a substitute for sand because it's cheaper and just as inert. But it's mostly like, it may be like a 1 to 2 to 2 ratio of peat, perlite, and then the sand or blasting abrasive. So most of what is in here is fairly mineral, it's fairly open and well draining. And when I water it, I keep it only just damp. The surface will often dry out almost completely as well in between waterings. So the actual pot inside is always at kind of just damp level so that it's never too wet and it never dries out, so that I don't risk rotting the plant, and also the plant is not at risk of drying out and wilting. If you can keep those kinds of conditions, this guy will grow pretty well, and you have fair chance if you can keep that kind of moderate watering schedule. Dentata might also be possible. It's a species that requires it even drier though, often regularly drying out in between waterings, having a big pot to keep very moderate moisture levels all the way through, keep it stable. But if you can manage that, you want to keep the temperatures fairly warm during summer. These guys will experience conditions up into the 80s, 90s, 100 degrees Fahrenheit during summer, and in the winter fairly cool and a little bit more humid to mimic the natural cycles that they experience in the wild. So in winter, temperatures of maybe 50 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit. They will take 70s, of course, because this guy, again, he grows alongside a lot of the other carnivores that I have, and the temperatures don't vary quite as much in the main greenhouse as they do in some of the other ones. So, but for best results, fairly cool in winter, warm in summer, and again, always kind of moderately moist. And so, this is a species that is becoming more common in cultivation. People are starting to get into tissue culture as more people get it flowering and growing well. Seeds are becoming more common, although still fairly difficult to source because they're very sporadically available. So if you want to get one, just kind of keep an eye out. Keep in mind, most of these, even if you get like a tissue culture plant like this one started out as, you're probably going to look at it's going to cost 40 to 60, maybe more dollars for a healthy established plant. But that's about all that I have for you guys for this species this time. If you have any questions, things you'd like clarified, or something that I might have gotten wrong, because nobody's perfect, feel free to leave a comment down below. Make sure to like and subscribe so that you don't miss any of the upcoming videos. There's always things in the works. Make sure to hit that little black bell that YouTube has so that you make sure to get all the updates. If you'd like to help support the development of videos and educational blogs and such, or adding information and files to the database on the website, carltoncarnivores.com, you can join at as a supporter at our Patreon page, www.patreon.com/hcarlton. The funds there help me keep the website running, and of course help give me time to where I can actually sit down and make videos like this, as well as patrons get access to early notices to releases of products on the website, exclusive products. Sometimes you get discounts. There is exclusive content that I will post on there, photos and videos of things, stuff that I'm doing day to day, special little trips that I make that are just not quite enough to make a full video out of. Or also I will be doing giveaways as soon as we get enough supporters in there that are interested in getting seeds and such going on. Also, you can buy plants at the website shop. Just send me a message once you decide on there. The lists are on the website, carltoncarnivores.com. Shoot me a message once you decide what you might be interested in, and I will work out a total, get to you some interesting plants. And I also have things like snakeskin resin jewelry to help support the animals here. And if you want to see more photos and videos and such, you can always find me on social media accounts. Facebook, Instagram, and even TikTok right now at Carlton Carnivores. And until next time, I'm Hawken Carlton, and this is Carlton Carnivores.